Hey, you guys, welcome to another week of creative inspiration. I have a great guest today. His name is Travis Preston, a very accomplished theater director. He's also the Dean of Theater at CalArts outside of Los Angeles, a very top-notch art school that has a themed entertainment program. So we're going to ask him all about that. And when I say we, I mean I'm going to ask him all about that. You guys, it's creative inspiration time. That's right, it's already Thursday. Can you believe it? These weeks are flying by. Congratulations, you made it through another week and you haven't been murdered by a horde of massive hornets. So things are looking up. So we'll get to Travis in just a second, but first I want to share with you some cool things that I saw on the internet. First of all, there's this group. They do sketches, like whiteboard sketches, to illustrate your talk or seminar. So if you're doing a talk online, hire them.
What is scribing? You could say that it's a kind of visual note-taking. It's illustration on the spot. It's what brilliant ideas, precious information and important conversations look like when they're captured by a team of exceptional skill and creativity. Ideas that might have been buried in pages of text or lost in hours of talk become more coherent, more tangible, more memorable and more engaging through drawing. Scribing creates a point of focus, a place where minds can meet and connections can be made. It has the power to align people behind one vision, unite them in their purpose and immerse them in the ideas that matter.
Secondly, I want to share with you some parties that you can attend. You can go to parties online. There are classes that you can attend online, and there are art classes where you can learn to paint, and there are even classes for kids. So if your kids are driving you nuts and you want to stick them in front of the computer for an hour and teach them how to draw or paint, I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. Also, here's a seminar that I'd like to recommend that's coming up later on, an art seminar that you can attend online for free. So learn more about that, and if that piques your interest, I encourage you to do that. And right now it's time for our interview, so let's get to that conversation with Travis Preston. Here he is. Well, how is it going? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Not at all. I'm very pleased. It's going well. It must be, 100 degrees down in Orlando?
No, it's actually very pleasant out here. It's in the mid 80s. It's been
Excellent.
So it's okay. So I just wanted to thank you and tell you who you're talking to. So this is a group of Universal Studios theme park designers who are working on a project together. And so in the office, I do a talk every week, and I often invite people in to talk about their creative experiences. And so I wanted to do this as we're working remotely. And so this is a great opportunity to bring in people who are not in Orlando, who can then talk to our group about what their creative life is all about.
That's great. That sounds wonderful. I am curious, is there, once we're done, is there any way that I might be able to perhaps share this CalArts community? Or
I think it would be okay to share it within the community. We're encouraging people not to post this on social media and things like that, because this is basically a conversation that we are having within our virtual office. So I can also, like, if we talk about some of the productions you've worked on, I can pull clips and stuff like that, and I don't have to worry about getting rights and things because it's not for public consumption. This is for private, but you can share that privately within your institution.
Okay, great. That's great.
Right. So let me just tell everybody about some of your many accomplishments. So Travis Preston, now what is interesting to me about you, in addition to all the theater you've directed theater, you've directed opera, the classics, from the Greeks to Shakespeare to contemporary greats like Sam Shepard, and also world premieres. Um, but you are also the dean of the theater school at CalArts and the head of the artistic program that they have there. And I find it fascinating. You were getting your PhD in psychology, and you decided, hey, this theater stuff is pretty interesting. I think I'll go to the Yale School of Drama. Is that what happened?
That is pretty much what happened. I'm actually astonished that you know that detail. Uh, I was working on a PhD at Indiana University in psychology, but it wasn't clinical psychology. It was actually experimental psychology, and at Indiana, that was really behaviorism. So I was working more in a laboratory than I was in the kind of clinical arena. But actually, the transition to the theater was quite easy. And then I applied on somewhat of a lark to the Yale School of Drama, and I was accepted. So all of a sudden, I became a director,
It's just that simple, right?
more or less.
So, speaking of reinventing, so you reinvented yourself. You've also you've reinvented a lot of theater production. So, back in 1980, and early in your directing career, you did Prometheus, and then you did it again for the Getty Villa, and you reinterpreted it in a whole new way. So, I'm interested in what's that like to take, as we call in our world, an IP. But a piece of theater, and then to take a fresh look at it a few decades later.
Well, I think that it's very interesting that the first time that I directed Prometheus was in very, very particular situation. I was invited to Poland to direct a production, and of course, Poland was a part of the East Bloc at the time. It was a very repressive government, and I was quite young. I was 24 years old. It was my first professional production outside of the Yale Rep, outside of my relationship to the Yale School of Drama. And then many years later, in 2013, I was asked to investigate the piece again in the context of the Getty Villa. And I did that, as you may know, with an amazing actor, someone who won an Emmy, I believe, last year, Ron Cephas Jones. And I think that, to be honest, when they asked me to do Prometheus, I almost didn't remember that I had directed it before. But there was such a long time between those events. But I do think what it bears out, Steve, is that the circumstances were so radically different that it was the circumstances that configured the difference of the landscape and of the aesthetic landscape. So it wasn't that I had an idea about Prometheus Bound and then that idea shifted. It was actually that the circumstances were so radically different that I had to engage the vitality of the community that I was working with and the vitality of the place in which I was working. And of course, not insignificant in that was the fact that I produced the work at the Getty Villa in an outdoor theater. And I was always disappointed by the fact that that theater was visually insufficient. When I saw productions there, I was always underwhelmed because the circumstances of the location were always greater than the visual experience that was presented by the productions. So that's when I was working together with Efren Degladillo as the set designer, and we came upon the idea of the Great Steel Wheel, which was a 25-foot high steel construction that the entire play was going to be performed on. And of course, we brought in the Foys from Vegas to train the entire chorus how to work safely in the steel construction. And of course, Ron did his entire performance on the wheel. It provided us with challenges that were not dissimilar to the ones that you encounter in doing large-scale production within Universal, because the first thing we encountered was the fact that the floor at the Getty, because the Getty does have some resource, was marble, and of course the weight of the steel construction was annihilating their floor.
Yeah, because that wheel was like 5 tons, right?
Yes, it was massive, and it was brought into the performance space with a crane. I wanted to bring it in by helicopter in order to create a press event, but the people who lived in Brentwood wouldn't allow it.
Oh, that's so funny.
So for me, always, I feel that creating theater, creating performance, is about how you embrace the immediate circumstances and how you can mine those circumstances to create the most exciting possibility. And that has less to do with my fixed conception and more to do with how I'm able to exploit the immediate resources at hand.
That's terrific. Now, again, along the theme that I've kind of landed upon here of reinvention. So you were the artistic director there at CalArts of the theater program, but then you became the dean of the theater school in about 10 years ago. And you, I guess, must have decided, or it was presented to you, I'd like to hear the genesis of that, but you started this theme park design program within the theater department a few years ago, right? Could you talk about how that came to be?
Yes, it actually proved to be quite natural. We were finding, because of our experimental emphasis at CalArts, we were finding that our students, of course, they can design the death of the salesman, but they were interested in engaging more exciting design challenges. We did a lot of site-specific production. We did a production a few years ago at the Huntington Museum and Botanical Gardens that was in their Chinese garden. A lot of site-specific work, a lot of things that would not be considered traditional theater in any stretch of the imagination. And then we found out that our students were very, very readily going into the themed entertainment world. And they were going into that world for a variety of reasons. One was that their experimental emphasis was speaking to the environment and to the challenges that you often confront in the themed experience world. And they had the capacity to think outside the box with respect to conventional stage spaces, because they had been asked throughout their experience at CalArts to engage a variety of spaces. Additionally, I think it was clear that some of the most exciting design challenges that exist in the world exist within the themed experience space. And that began to be extremely exciting. And so we found that our students from all of the design métiers, but also, I will say, from the directing program, Michael Young, who's with Disney, was a graduate of the directing program at CalArts. But we're seeing them actors, understand character, they understand story. They were able to figure out very handily how you can disperse story over time and space. And so it was a natural step for us. And of course, we're very excited by it. We're working together with Roger Holtzberg, who had also been, I think for a time Roger had been at Imagineering. But Roger had suffered a bout with cancer. He
Yes.
survived. He survived it very handily, and he came to us with the idea of how can we, from his hospital experience, how can we facilitate healing through a design experience that we could apply in the hospital? And this became a facet of our experience design program. And I think that the possibilities within this arena are very exciting. And of course, as you know, no doubt that you're engaging in Orlando, relate to environmental concerns, relate to the whole evolution of contemporary thinking about how we interact with space and environment.
That's terrific because, back in the ancient times when I was getting my education, so I wrote my own major because the major didn't exist, and I was interested in this field. So I have an undergraduate in set design, and then I went through a traditional graduate program of architecture, and I found that over the years, and the people that have come into our business, they come from theater, they come from architecture, they come from film, sometimes they come from writing, they come from these various creative disciplines. But now there are specific programs. So there are the programs at CalArts and a few other institutions of higher learning. So I'm curious, over the last few years that you've had this program, in addition to students that had come for theater, are there now students who have come specifically for this program? And are you finding that students that are entering the program are slightly different than they were a few years ago?
Absolutely. I think they have broader interests. I think that we are finding, first of all, that we're speaking to students who actually want to engage a bigger part of the world and want their aesthetic experience to impact a bigger part of the world than what would normally be associated with conventional theater. We have a lot of people who then have had an interest, because of course, I have a faculty that has 2 Tony Award winners on it. I have Mara Isaacs, the head of our producing program, produced Hadestown on Broadway. We have a very celebrated faculty that still interacts with what we might describe as conventional theater. However, I think that the students are seeing that within museum design, for example, within an array of experience design across a variety of métiers, they're interested in engaging more worlds. And their relationship to themed entertainment or themed experience, or more broadly considered experience design, is suiting them very well in this regard. Rather than, let's say, being exclusively a freelance stage designer.
Yeah. So it's interdisciplinary. I imagine you have, well, as you've said, you have actors and writers and designers and different people from across the discipline that are taking classes and focusing on that now, right?
No question. And I would say that of course, we're investigating interactive media, virtual reality, and this very COVID crisis made it so that all of our students had to be engaging profoundly in online experiences and in the manipulation of digital media. And, of course, within your world and certainly within ours, we're doing a lot of experiences that combine technologies associated with virtual experience and the integration of that with live experience. And that can be successfully achieved in a way that makes it more powerful than when it's one or the other.
Yeah. So are they, now that you're learning remotely, and you probably have to adjust the assignments for that. And as you're saying, they're exploring virtual reality. So are you finding that their work is reflective of the conditions they find themselves in?
No question. I think one thing that I would like to say relative to the program that we took a long time to develop the experience design program at CalArts. It was because we were interested in training creative leaders. We were interested in creating creative directors like yourself, rather than people who were functioning more within middle management, let's say, or who were working with specific skill-based work. And what we're finding, of course, is that students might self-identify, and I think this is very significant related to what you were describing in your own experience, Steve. You had experience as a set designer, you had experience with architecture, but your interests traversed a variety of areas. And that's what we're finding with our students. And that they come in, if they come in as an actor, their image of themselves when they're 18 is that they're standing on a red carpet with a statue, right? A statue. And what we've been able to do is to say, yes, we enfranchise you and we're training you, yes, to be effective performers, designers, managers, of course, because we train producers as well. But we want you to self-identify in ways that are broad, because you do not know where your opportunities are going to come from. And you don't, the worst thing that could happen is that actually there's an opportunity that presents itself to you and you don't recognize it, right? So that's what is part of our philosophy.
I'm curious how, because it seems like in our business, there's ever increasing dependence on known intellectual property. So the big entertainment companies, there's Disney and there's Universal, and they have access to a lot of very high profile IP. And you have, like I referenced earlier, you have used the IP of whether it's Shakespeare or original brand new productions, so Democracy in America or other things you've worked on that never before been seen. And how do you bring that experience to teaching students to work with an IP?
Well, I think, there are times, of course, depending on the initiative, and this is something you should know. We have partnered with companies where we actually put a team of MFA, very gifted and very talented MFA students from a variety of areas to approach the specific problem that was encountered by that company. And of course, then the students sign all of the non-disclosure agreements and all of those things so that they can engage that problem. And so we have a multiplicity of things so where they're actually dealing with the challenges and the opportunities that exist with existing intellectual property. Of course, when they're creating their own work, they're either making it from the ground up, looking at property that is which is in the realm of public domain, or we turn them over to a very clever attorney who tries to figure out how to wind their
Where
way.
would we be without clever attorneys?
Exactly. And we have been pretty successful. In fact, there was one artist who was creating, if you can imagine this, the challenges of this, who was creating a video installation using footage from the Super Bowl. Now, if you want to talk about trademark infringement, if you want, all of the variety of stuff. Now but when I had an attorney look at it, he said, we've got an arguable case. We've got an arguable case going for a fair use in that case. So a lot of the issues that we deal with, and actually more profoundly, that happens to us in the music arena, that the music rights are the most tricky for us to navigate. Well, we do what we can.
Right. Um, so I wanted to ask you about something else. So you've been essentially knighted, right? You're a chevalier. Well,
Yeah,
what's that all about? By the Order of Arts? It sounds very, very fancy.
it is. And I'm actually, um, yes, I was knighted in France by the Minister of Culture. And it really happened because I'd done a lot of work in France as a director. Uh, as you know, I've worked quite a lot internationally, and the majority of my career was in Europe. Uh, and then I was also participating in the co-production of works by significant French authors here in the United States. And those two things together made them led to this distinction, which I have to tell you a funny story about. My wife and I went to the ceremony at the French consulate, and they give you a medal, and it's a very nice medal. And my wife and I went out for a drink afterwards, and by the time we had gotten to the bar, I had lost the medal.
Oh,
Like,
and never to be found?
yeah, that one was never to be found. They did, however, graciously get me another.
Wow. I wonder if that ended up in one of those wonderful street markets in Paris that you see.
Exactly.
Um, but that's interesting perspective also because so much work now because the the U.S. market is pretty mature when it comes to theme parks. It's pretty rare that a brand new major theme park is built in the United States. So they're popping up all over Asia, and that seems to be the future. And so, do you think there's a distinction in teaching students for that kind of experience where they have to have that more global focus?
I think that there are, one of the things that we have done is we've engaged a lot with China. The piece that we did at the Huntington was with a significant Chinese director, originally from Taipei, but working now permanently in Shanghai. His name is Stan Lai, very important guy, and I've been in a lot of conversations with Chinese company, not the least of which was Perfect World, which I believe you might have some familiarity with, because they had been in conversation throughout the United States. They were principally a gaming company, and then they realized that the characters that they had created through the gaming were appropriate to the themed entertainment world, and they wanted to get involved in that. The cultural differences, as you know, are profound. And we get a chance to experience that directly because we have so many students from China, both from the mainland and then from Hong Kong and Taipei. Actually, recently I even had two students from Macau. And so we get a chance to deal with those cultural differences firsthand. We were hired by Disney to go to Shanghai to assist them in the training of stage managers because, as you know, any of those parks in China have local hire agreements, but they don't have often the people trained to do that. So we went over there to train stage managers for them. Um, and so, it is changing the landscape substantially. And of course, they're building themed experiences around almost everything. I have a friend who's Chinese, who is working on a theme park related to Mao and the creation of contemporary China. Um, and it's, of course, paid for by the party. Um, and he's one of the leaders of this project. So those things, which almost, might be more like what we would find in Washington, you know, going to the new Museum of African American History and Culture. Um, where there is a facet of the museum design, which is, of course, experiential and is part of the themed experience. Very, very interesting.
So what do you think your students come away from the program with that they didn't have coming into it? What do you think is the thing that they glean from the program that's most useful to them when they enter the professional world?
Well, I think that I think they have a broad appreciation for the intricacies and complexities of creating a themed experience, broadly understood. I think they get an experience with the complexities of how you budget something, um, and and how you can be liberated through the engagement with the concrete, both possibilities and limitations of budget. Um, I think they gain an appreciation of what it means, the difference between creating something for a play that will last however long a run is, and for something that has to endure for decades in a theme park, and what and how to engage and discuss that kind of enduring value. Um, I also think they're remarkably. We have great teachers. As I mentioned, we have people who have won awards across all media, and I think they are particularly imaginative. What we do at CalArts is we support the imagination first, and then we look at how do you actually achieve those goals, rather than starting with the limitations first.
Yeah, no, that's a really valuable, and it's such a collaborative endeavor what we do, and it takes so many different kinds of people, from engineers to lighting designers to costume designers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the differences, I think, is that if people come from the world of theater or film or even architecture, assuming they're a principal at an architecture firm, they get credit. They are recognized, whereas when they come into the world of experience design, sometimes they get sublimated, and it's so collaborative that it's the team. There's one name on the door, and it's the company or the show that you're creating, and you're not singled out. So you have to get that reward from the experience and watching the guests have that experience, and that there's a purity and that kind of satisfaction, I think, because you're not doing it necessarily for the glory of it. You're doing it so that those guests can have that experience.
I think that there's a profound point in that. And I would argue that some of the greatest works of art in the history of the world were precisely created in that way. That if we look at the Gothic cathedral or any of the massive achievements of civilization, we wouldn't be able to say, oh, that was designed by Frank Gehry. I mean, it was
Starchitect. We have the term now, Starchitect.
Starchitect. It wasn't emerging from that perspective. And I actually believe that within artistic practice, that is going to become more and more the case. It is in the experimental theater world very common for us to think of that's a piece by the Wooster Group. That is not necessarily a piece by, of course, we know Liz Lecomte is the director of the Wooster Group, but it's identified as a collective first. And I think that I think that collective creation is very productive, and I think that it's the sublimation of the individual ego is a part of the power of that process.
Excellent. Well, Travis, this has been very fascinating. We've already gone through a half hour. I can't believe it. But hopefully, when we're all free from our confines, that you'll come visit us in Orlando.
Yes, no question. It's like I've recently had to go down there often, and my wife and I, doing some consulting down there. You know,
Excellent.
so I will, Steve. I will let you know when I'm next in town.
Okay, please do. And thank you so much.
Excellent. You take care, man.
Well, that's another week of creative inspiration. I hope you guys got something out of this. I know that I certainly did. And thanks for joining me. And we'll catch you next week right here or see you on the WebEx. Stay safe out there. Bye bye, everybody.